Hello and welcome to my presentation, a critical review of German volume training for muscle building and hypertrophy. So let's begin by describing what German volume training is. It originated in Germany in the 1970s and was used by national weightlifting coaches to increase muscle mass of their athletes in the off-season. It was then later popularized in the US by Charles Poliquin and Vince Gironda. It consists of 10 sets of 10 repetitions, utilizing compound lifts and using this method for no more than 2 exercises in a training session. Loads consist of 60% 1RM or 20RM to allow for the high training volume to be attained, and recovery between sets is around 60 to 90 seconds. Let's begin by looking at the mechanisms of muscle hypertrophy. So Schoenfeld describes 3 main mechanisms of muscle hypertrophy, with the first one being mechanical tension, and this refers to the contraction of muscle fibers during force production, which is believed to be the primary driver for hypertrophy. The second one is metabolic stress, and this is basically the accumulation of byproducts from anaerobic properties. It's unclear whether this is an independent mechanism or a secondary mechanism. However, a review by Dankel et al. Suggests that metabolic stress likely doesn't directly induce muscle growth. Rather, it may have secondary effects, such as the contribution towards local muscle fatigue, thus increasing the activation of high threshold muscle units. Then we've also got muscle damage, and that is literally the damage and repair of muscle tissue. It's also important to look at the myogenic pathways, so understanding cell signaling, hormonal responses, and muscle protein balance, which all influence hypertrophy. So what is the scientific rationale behind German volume training? So it consists of a short recovery of 60 to 90 seconds. And it is designed to elicit greater metabolic stress, as previously mentioned. This is due to research showing acute hormone responses post-exercise with short rest periods. However, there is no real concrete evidence that has a significant impact on hypertrophy. Including, as well as this, the rationale of German volume training is to totally deplete the muscle fibers involved in one key muscle joint exercise, rather than disperse the fatigue across alternative muscle fibers, as could occur by doing multiple exercises. So let's dive deeper into the rest periods. So this study on the left consisted of 20 young trained men, and they had a long recovery group of 3 minutes and a short recovery group of 1 minute. Muscle thickness was significantly greater in the long compared to the short rest period groups. In addition to this, a different study looked at long recovery group, and this was 2.5 minutes, and a short recovery group of 1 minute, with significantly greater increases in cross-sectional area in the rest durations of 2.5 minutes. Further research also looked at rest periods, but with longer durations and lower durations, so more of a difference between both. And this study here on the left looked at a long recovery of 5 minutes and a short recovery of 2 minutes, with interestingly not finding a difference in cross-sectional area. The one on the right, however, looked at 4 minutes versus 1 minute, with greater increases in body mass with the 1 minute rest periods. Now, when interpreting the results from these studies, it's important to consider rest intervals as absolutes. For example, 1 minute versus 5 minutes, rather than an arbitrary relative value like short versus long. So to conclude in regards to rest periods, 1 minute is likely too short in duration to promote maximal hypertrophic gains, while 2 minutes rest period potentially provides enough rest in between sets. Let's begin by defining volume when talking about volume for hypertrophy. Now, Volume is believed to be the primary driver when it comes to German volume training. That's the name. In strength and conditioning, volume is usually categorized as the quantity of work performed, typically calculated as sets times reps times load, which equals volume load. However, due to muscle hypertrophy possessing the ability to be achieved by a large spectrum of rep ranges, a more efficient way of categorizing volume for hypertrophy is potentially by counting the number of sets, per muscle group, as reported by the systematic review, suggesting that as long as reps are performed to failure in an adequate volume of anywhere between 6 to 20 reps, volume can be quantified by the amount of sets performed. So what is the optimal volume? It is clear that there's a dose-response relationship, as described by Schoenfeld in 2016, and this dose-response relationship suggests that there's a relationship between volume and hypertrophy. So as you increase volume, hypertrophy also increases. However, up to a certain point, it doesn't increase at the same rate, and in fact, as you go beyond that, it can actually decrease. So this systematic review and meta-analysis by Schoenfeld shows just that, and the exact numbers of sets are not yet clear in the research, but it is believed to be around 10 sets. Anywhere up to 10 sets, you see a rapid increase in hypertrophy, and then after 10 sets, anywhere between 10 to 20, it's a more gradual and slow process, and then after that, there are diminishing returns. Let's proceed to look at the effect of modified German volume training program on muscular hypertrophy and strength. So in this study, they looked at 10 sets of 10 repetitions versus 5 sets of 10 repetitions. It included 19 healthy men aged 19 to 24. The training protocol was 6 weeks long, and there were 3 sessions per week with 24 plus hours recovery between sessions. The results show that both groups increased total lean tissue. However, the 5-set group saw greater increases in trunk and arm lean tissue, and no significant increases in leg lean tissue were found between groups. In addition to this, the 5-set group saw significantly greater strength gains in the upper body, but no differences between groups were shown in the lower body. And this is believed to be potentially due to day-to-day lower body use, but also there's greater androgen receptor content in the upper body. Let's look at further research and most recent research looking into volume. And in this study, the methodology included 40 young men with 3 years of training, and it consisted of 4 groups: a group performing 5 sets, another group 10 sets, another group 15, and the other 20 sets per week. The training split consisted of a push-pull legs once a week, and sets were performed to failure. The results showed that 5-set group experienced the greatest lean tissue gains, and the 20 sets saw the least lean tissue gains, suggesting that less volume is potentially more effective for hypertrophy. So let's take a deeper dive into this. So when looking at this research, there are some potential limitations. Firstly, the training experience of the subjects. Although the authors suggested that the subjects did have a lot of training experience, at least 3 years, the 1RM values suggested for the lower body suggested that their training their strength is actually not that high for their training age. Also, all this volume was performed within 1 session. So training volume was all accumulated in a single training session per week, potentially highlighting a single session volume threshold. In the figure here on the screen, figure 4, by Peterson in 2005 suggests that when looking at when considering the training age, untrained individuals are going to respond to almost anything, and they don't really need that much volume, so a lower volume for those individuals is fine. However, as you get more experienced, you potentially do need a little bit more volume to see further results. So this leads us on to the discussion of frequency. So how frequently could you train, or should you train? So when looking back at that previous study and a single session dosage relationship, if that was split throughout the week, could we have potentially seen better results? Well, this study in this recent study in 2018 looked at how many times per week should a muscle be trained to maximize muscle hypertrophy. And this is a systematic review and meta-analysis of studies examining the effects of resistance training frequency showed that higher frequencies do not actually elicit significantly greater hypertrophic responses when total volume is equated for. Let's now look at intensity. So Schoenfeld et al. In 2017 concluded that based on the current evidence, low loads of 60% or below of 1 RM, and he compared it to high loads of 60% in 1 RM. It showed that there was similar increases in muscle size when performed to momentarily muscular failure, suggesting that training close to failure or to failure increases the motor unit recruitment of the fiber type, and the higher threshold fibers with the biggest potential for growth. So it's critical to train, or at least to train with reps in reserve, anywhere between 3 to complete failure. So 3 reps in reserve to complete failure. German volume training doesn't actually account all that much for the variation of exercises, because we are performing 10 sets of 10 repetitions. So this actually ignores the principles of region of accentuated force production and also the direction and amplitude of movement, because muscles have different anatomical alignments, the muscle fibers. So potentially mixing up the exercises could induce further hypertrophy, for example the upper chest and the lower chest. Other considerations are introducing new exercises. When introducing new exercises, that there's potentially less stress through repetitive movement. There may be an increase in motivation and therefore intent when mixing it up. However, and this is where potentially German volume training is better, is the fact that from a technical proficiency, if you are good at performing a certain lift, then you're probably going to get more mechanical tension and recruit more motor units. Whereas if the exercise is new, then you're not going to be able to load and efficiently create that mechanical tension. Let's move on to look at recovery and fatigue. So recovery and fatigue, or stimulus and fatigue. So in order to grow, you need to stimulate the muscles, and therefore you need to stimulate the muscles enough, but you also need to make sure that you can recover from that stimulus. Important aspects to consider are joint stress, which may limit the total volume. So in regards to frequency, if we split that total volume, then we can potentially see better results, although the studies are still inconclusive. Then we've also got systematic fatigue, which refers to all forms of fatigue such as the central nervous system. And heavier compound lifts generally induce more systematic fatigue than others, which then leads us to think about whether a mixed approach of higher volume and lower volume, or even how we periodize the sessions or the training in a way that we're not accumulating too much fatigue with going too heavy, or then when we think about peripheral fatigue, we generally the volume is the one that we need to be aware of. So perhaps mixing that up would help us see better results. So key factors in conclusion. Mechanical tension is believed to be the primary driver of hypertrophy. Doing more volume usually results in more muscle growth, but there is a point of diminishing returns. 2 to 3 minutes recovery has been shown to elicit greater hypertrophic responses than shorter rest periods. There is a clear dose-response relationship between volume and hypertrophy. And it's very important that inter-individual differences must be considered, that they are considered. German volume training, 10 sets of 10 reps, isn't more effective than doing 5 sets of 10 reps if you're relatively new to strength training. However, the more experienced you are, you may benefit from more volume. And research shows that actually higher frequency may not be as important as initially believed. So based on all these factors, we can start to understand whether German volume training is effective or isn't effective. But it's very important to account for inter-individual differences and apply that in your own context. Thank you for listening.